Okay, so we got to gas. And the thing about gas, Germans did it first. As soon as the Germans did it, just opened up. Once one side does it, the other one doesn't. And Germany, it makes sense Germany would do it first. They're the ones who are most outnumbered and surrounded. So they're the ones who are more desperate. And so eventually we're going to have, by 1918, 40% of all artillery rounds are going to be gas shells. And so a lot of the duds I told you about, they still find, a lot of them are gas. In fact, there's a whole branch of the Belgian army, about 400 men. Their whole job is to explode unexploded World War I shell and dispose of gas shell. To this day, to be driving around rural Belgium, there'll be these Belgian army depots. That's what they do. Yes.
The other things that we first
Are they what?
vegan, like there's iron, like there is iron dedicated.
Waffles, actually. But as you see this, here's German soldiers attacking through a gas. Here is a German soldier with a gas mask, machine gun, a very prototypical round. You can just tell the ruin around for shells, and you'll notice a German grenade. So the German grenades would eventually, they put a stick on it, a wooden handle with a grenade on top. They got a handle to throw, and they're not overhand throwers, and so they didn't have that. I should add, Americans would call these by World War II, they're called potato mashers. So when I first was introduced to them, it's, hey, it's a potato masher. If you find a grenade, do not mash a potato with it. That's good advice. See, life lessons. Next. So with that, here's a couple more shots. Those are American soldiers training in gas. They use tear gas at first. Tear gas is more of an irritant, but it tastes bad. It hurts really bad. It kind of burns your eyes, your throat. These first gas masks were pretty primitive, and you can imagine how it'd be impossible to fight it. But that shows the problem with gas. It was terrifying. It could be used as a weapon of terror, but both sides would have to put gas masks on, and that would inhibit their fighting. Attackers had to go attack with those horrible things on, and defenders would have to fight in them. Eventually, they would come to more like this. Both sides would adopt gas masks like that, something for the mule. And here's a list of the main gases. Tear gas we tried a few times in 1914, but chlorine gas was the first one, but it's lighter than air, so it blew away really fast. Phosgene was very similar to air, and phosgene gas is incredibly deadly. But since it's about the same level as air, it dispersed pretty quickly. So horrible gas. Nightmarish effect. Your eyes would eat away your lungs really quick if you breathed enough, but not as effective. The gas that would become the most effective and synonymous with the war, once again invented by the Germans, we dubbed mustard gas. It was kind of yellow and had a rotten egg smell, so they called it mustard gas. And it was heavier than air, so it would sink into the trenches. It would sink into the dugouts. And it would linger on the ground, especially if it was clay-like soil like in Belgium, or it didn't rain. And so days afterwards, if men were crawling in it and got it on their skin, it was a corrosive, so it would burn your skin. And so exposed skin had the potential, they hadn't got enough on it. But even if it didn't really totally burn it, it hurt. The big thing is think about what that would do to your eyes. Think about what that would do to your lungs. It would burn your skin, imagine your eye. In fact, one of the big or kind of the symbols of the war would be men being led back from the front, eyes blinded by mustard gas. And the thing is, you can imagine how bad that would hurt. If I just get an eyelash in there, I can't do anything to have an eyelash and mustard gas. But think about if you breathe it, not through your lungs. Okay, might not kill you, but it would corrode your lungs. And so you can't breathe, it would hurt. You'd have a lot of times never get full lung capacity back. And if it was enough, you would bleed to death inside your lung. Basically, you would asphyxiate by your lung. It was horrible, a nightmare. And so here, these are British soldiers. That's an American soldier. You see the burns from mustard gas? And then these are French soldiers loading shell. And they really weren't that effective in battle. But it's just that initial terror factor, but it tastes bad, it smells, it's terrifying. And so there would be some uses afterwards. For example, when Britain was trying to subdue a new country they created called Iraq, they used mustard gas on civilians. Italy used it against Ethiopia in 1956. It wasn't used that much in the war, but Japan used it against Chinese soldiers. After the war, both sides kept mustard gas, but it just wasn't very effective. They worked more to biological weapons. But in 1979, Iraq invaded, I'm sorry, 1980, Iraq invaded Iran. And it looked like Iran might win after a while. So the US helped Iraq get mustard gas so they could use that as some evidence. Which of course Iraq would use to subdue a revolution in their own country. And then later on, the United States would use Iraq using mustard gas as an excuse to attack them in 2003. And yes, the US helped support mustard gas. Look how evil they are. They use mustard gas on those people. Where did you get the mustard gas? The point is, remember what I told you about war? Who dies? Yes.
So that means the US technically declared war against this power.
Because the United States used mustard gas?
No, because it's a block. I am supplied Iraq with mustard gas.
And the CIA helped put their leader in power. The US has done that a few times. Nah, more like an ally, a former ally, but yeah. And so with that, here's a dog, rigged one up, live dogs in trenches. They would eventually come up with something for the horses, but you can see they couldn't cover the eyes. To the horses we blinded, of course. Mustard gas was horrible, but the point is, both sides realized it's not going to work on the battlefield. But think what mustard gas would do against civilians. What a weapon of terror. And once you have mustard gas, these unconventional weapons are going to be so much more terrifying than bombs. The plan was to carpet bomb. Okay, they really didn't have the technology, but they had new bombers by 1919. To lay a carpet of gas on German cities along the line. That was the plan for 1919, but the war ended before they could hit civilians with mustard gas. But that means by World War I, everyone's accepted they use mustard gas. Now, both sides avoided it because it wasn't very effective, and therefore they didn't want it used on each other. But once they decided mustard gas, what that said yesterday, pretty soon they're both using horrific incendiary bombs. Napalm's the most famous, jellied gasoline. The worst is something called white phosphorus. And white phosphorus, it burns wherever you have oxygen. And so it just burns until it runs out of fuel. And so you put water on it, well, there's oxygen in water, so it burns even more intense with water. If it hits your skin, there's a lot of oxygen in the blood. So it just keeps burning right through. But they set whole entire cities on fire, killing hundreds of thousands. And the Allies, the United States of Britain. And once you get that, isn't it an easy step to do? I'm not saying a just or moral step, but that's how the logic of the world works. Gas, the incendiaries led to. And the United States is still the only country to use nuclear weapons. And here are therefore our British soldiers or British civilians ready for the gas attack. And here is a baby, kind of rigged up a gas full. So, and I know what I would think about. I like gas and mustard gas. Here, you can get this tattoo. Now, if you see somebody with a tattoo like this, what should you do? Yeah, avoid them. There's something up with them. Also, let me tell you one more thing about tattoos. What is that tattoo going to look like in about 5 or 6 years? Their body begins to change. A black blob. So this is my advice. This is where I can warn you about tattoos. If you decide to get a tattoo, don't forget they don't wash off. And your body will change. And if you ever go to, let's say, a swimming pool and see older people with tattoos, and I wonder what that was someday. Remember that if you're thinking about it. Because that's a great green blob you have there. You got a tattoo of an amoeba.
There's need to get a skin color tattoo.
Tattoo removal actually is shockingly painful. Oh, unreal. Your skin color changes too. So with that, number 2, starvation blockade. And now there have been blockades and sieges before, but never used with such effectiveness and a clear part of the total war. And unrestricted summer warfare, I'll say in just a second, but this is a graph, or this percentage show how much food Britain and Germany had to import. And by 1913, almost 80% of the food, most from the United States. Germany, 40% had to be imported, just about. But the big thing is almost all their fertilizer from South America. They imported a lot of food from Brazil and Argentina, especially, but also the US. So a blockade, that could lead to starvation and disruption of the government. And think about it, the threat of starvation, what that's going to do, that could lead to revolution. And so the Allies are going to do a blockade almost immediately using the powerful Royal Navy. They didn't do it right here. They put it way back here between Scotland and Norway. Eventually, by 1918, there's going to be over 1 million underwater mines also laid there to stop ships. Yes, they still occasionally find some of those mines that became unmoored and kind of floated. A mine back then, imagine a big ball of gunpowder, basically, and how they would trigger that prong sticking out of it. And if a ship bumped them and break one of those prongs, it would blow. Today, the mines are magnetic. So if something big and magnetic goes, or big and steel goes by it. Yes. Okay. There's pirates down here, though. Sure. There still are. There's pirates off Somalia. Okay, so with that, they'd also put it here, here, and you can see how the blockade would work. No, for a while there, some things went through neutral Netherlands, but the Allies would cut that off. And the rules of war were, they would stop a ship and look for contrabands that might help the German war effort. Now let's be very clear. What were contrabands help the German war effort? Everything. So they're going to stop ships, escort it to harbor, and totally blockade by 1915. And that includes ships owned by American merchants. And so this is a big deal. They would stop a rider. The first US forces to arrive would be part of this blockade. And so Germany is going to be starved. And by 1916, 1917, and 1918, there's going to be food riots. In fact, arguably, what brought the German government down in 1918 were these food riots. Here and on the bottom, here's a bakery. And there's a bakery and a butcher shop that was hit by rocks when they tried to get food. Here is one to see, this is Berlin in 1918. Horse died, and immediately people came out and cut it out to try to get a little meat. And they gutted it, so all the guts are laying there. But let's be clear about it. The next day, those guts will be gutted too. Protein. And people are starving. And Germany had a really bad food distribution system because it was still an empire. People in the cities were starving to death. They killed all the livestock in 1916, thinking that would save food. That turned out to be a horrific disaster beyond proportion, especially when they had a really bad crop year in 1916. The winter of 1916, 1917 will be known as the turnip winter, because that was really their only food source. And potatoes, there was a blight that came through. It's just a series of events. It's really highly argued to this day how many people died because of the blockade. This is probably overstated, but this says by 1918, 293,000 people died of the blockade. And the point is, a lot of people did. The Germans probably exaggerated it, but it was a lot. But think about who's affected the most. Basically, people still grow. So 20 and younger. In fact, they called that generation of people born right before the war, during the war, starvation, or the blockade generation. And these are going to be the young men and women who would be the most avid Nazis. Doesn't it make sense? They had all the problems with it, they had the long memory. They all knew about the blockade. And the Allies kept the blockade going 6 months after the war to keep starving the Germans and Austrians to coerce the surgery. Anybody want to guess what very effective ultra-nationalistic propaganda in Germany will use after the war? The blockade, including a very ultra-nationalist, ultra-right-wing party called the National Socialists, the Nazis. So, what about the Germans? Well, the Germans, they knew Britain's even more vulnerable to this, but they couldn't get their navy out, so they had to use a weapon. They didn't have very many of them. Actually, the British have better submarines. Okay, Germans are called U-boats or Untersee boats. The German language is very, very descriptive. And unrestricted submarine warfare meant that they're not going to stop them like the Allied blockade did. They're going to sink them without warning, using a new weapon called a torpedo. Underwater, propelled by CO2. The idea is it would hit the ship underwater. And basically the ships come with this way, they would try to time it and knock the ship out. Submarines back then were very slow, and when they're underwater, they could only stay underwater for about 15 hours. By the end of the war, about 20. So that means that they have to be on the surface. They have no armor. Their only defense is submerging. So if they surface, they're really vulnerable. And so you can imagine submarine commanders did not want to surface, especially when the British started disguising merchant ships, disguising warships as merchant ships. So the submarine would surface, they can blow it away. All it takes is one hole in a submarine and it's done. They submerge and never come up. By the way, being a crewman on one of these boats would be the pit. It's very few survivors. But they started sinking in 1950 without warning, thinking they could knock the Royal Navy or knock Britain out. So what they did is they had very few submarines, but they put them here and here, that really short range, and just waited for ships to come up. And they started sinking a large number, including passenger liners, including ships from neutral United States. And this would come to the first climax in 1915, when just off the coast of Ireland, May of 1915, the large passenger liner called the Lusitania was hit and sunk. And it sunk literally just off the shore of Ireland. Over 1,200 people, mostly civilians, would be killed. Almost 200 Americans. It was coming from New York. The Germans warned they were going to sink, even though they're just trying to terrify people. And a submarine just happened to be lurking where that ship was. And the ship was not designed to load coal really fast, so it didn't have watertight compartments, so it sunk. Just boom, down. Terrifying. Right off the shore, I mean, you could see the shore, and 1,200 would be killed. Germany would pull back from this. They would pull back, but they would go back to unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917 to try to knock Britain out. But Germany never recovered from this. Here's this did not bring the United States into the war, but it angered them. And this is a great picture. Isn't that a good one? And the culture again. Boy, the Germans were hammered on that. They claim to be civilized. Look what they do. 3, bombing sheep from the air. And so, mass attacks on the wool industry. For some reason, they made a postcard of a German Zeppelin, and they decided, you know what? We're going to show a rigid airship, they were also called. Let's put it over sheep. I have no idea why. They rarely bombed sheep. But it's not a blimp. A blimp is basically like a balloon, usually oblong shape, full of air. This actually has a frame on it. You could go inside, and inside they have these big bladders of some lighter than air gas, helium or hydrogen. Now, which one would you rather use? And why? Why use helium? Hydrogen will explode. But the only source of helium Germany had at that time was the United States. The blockade, they couldn't get it. So they had to use hydrogen. But that's 20 years later, but yeah, they tried one more time on that. And these were huge. Sometimes the size of a football field, some of them were twice as big as a football. They would fly very slow. They could get about 15,000 feet, but that means it's really cold, lack of oxygen, if they want pressure on a ship. But still, Germany would use these as patrol, but then they started putting bombs. The problem was a massive thing twice the size of a football field, full of hydrogen. Not easy to hide. All you have to do is shoot it down and then or just hit it and it explodes. So they bombed at night. So they started bombing civilians at night. And pretty soon here, British spotlights over London. There's a picture of it. Here's a Zeppelin coming back from a raid. And it was very expensive. Nightmare for the crew. They couldn't hit anything, so they just randomly bombed civilian areas. Remember that randomness of total war. And it didn't work all that well, except just anger the British. But it set the precedent. We need a better weapon to bomb civilians. It's not like, well, maybe we should bomb civilians. It's like, oh, let's get better planes. One more thing. So I was taking a walking tour of London. It was 1960. Zeppelins, no. Taking a walking tour of London. And I highly recommend if you're going on trips, walking tours are awesome. We're going through, it was the Gaslight District. It's really cool. And I was standing there listening to the guy. And I looked down and there was like a little candy bar. Like one of those little crackle bars, those mini candy bars. Right there. And I'm like, oh. Now, here's another life lesson. Don't eat things you pick off on. Just don't do it. I know it might look tasty, but it was delicious. But anyways, I looked at, oh, there's a candy bar. And I just happened to see this. It wasn't even part of the tour. I was just standing right next to this. So I took a quick picture of it. I had to get a picture of the candy bar, so it's so funny. But so that was one of those places randomly hit by a Zeppelin. But soon you can get bombardment from airplanes. And that would become the key weapon. Think about the terror of that. Bombing from the air. The first bombs were pretty primitive. I like these ones. Dropping a bomb. Here, lobbing potato mashers. But eventually by 1917, both sides had 2- and 4-engine planes. These British bombers could carry over 2,000 pounds of bombs. And the plan was, like I told you, bomb and gas German cities. And this is German propaganda showing how evil the English are. This is what the English want, to bomb cities. That's why we must defeat them. This is a 1918 poster. Now, the thing about it was, it never really happened in 1918. The war ended, or 18 or 1919, the war ended. But after the war, everybody is thinking we got to get bombers to attack cities. And the assumption was when World War II began, it's going to be massive attacks on cities. It didn't quite happen like that completely. But once the bombing of cities began, it would be unending and terrifying. Yes. Well, remember, Pearl Harbor, though, was an American colonist.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
but
American base.
besides that.
There was, well, the Japanese attacked Alaska, which is also a colony. A place called Dutch Harbor, which is in the Aleutians. And a Japanese submarine did shell Los Angeles. Yeah, got that. That was the only parts. Well, and then the other American called like Guam was taken by the Japanese. Capabilities were taken. Weight was taken. Yes.
I think guys, movie of how this
I will, if you're going to be, if you continue to be mean to me, I'll make you watch the movie Pearl Harbor. Because it's that bad. So with that, so they would plan this, they never happened, but it's ready for the next war. And let's get to the last one. Genocide. No, I'm not saying that every country that enters total war will adopt genocide. But every country that enters total war will start taking the steps towards it. And that's what's terrible. Every single one does it. So what is genocide? Genocide is actually really hard to define, and genocide is really hard to prove. But it's a term that's going to come about after World War II. It's sometimes overused. It's sometimes overused too much. Mass murder, I know that sounds horrible, might be a better way to put it, but let's define it the best we can. It's state-sponsored and it's industrial. It's an industrial term, using the powers of a modern state or relatively modern state. And it's picking out, it's murdering people because of they're in some ethnic group or a national origin, color of skin, or religious, or it could be all of them together. And that's part of the reason why it's kind of hard to find. You know, mass murder, you know, the Soviet Union committed mass murder in the Ukraine. But it wasn't genocide per se, but it's still mass murder. And how do you measure that? It's just, that's why it's hard to define. And I'm always a little bit reluctant to use it for a lot of things, but mass murder. And the thing about it was, you must use the power of the state. And these states would not come about to the Industrial Revolution. That's why it's another one of the great things of Industrial Revolution, but it's a measure of total war. So here's a country fighting for their very existence, all countries. And they know the enemy is trying to undermine their government and create a revolution. And people start distrusting everybody. Now, if you pass a law like the Espionage Act, that implies there are spies all over. And what's a German spy going to look like in the United States? Look around. What would the spy look like? And the person accusing him, because that's what a spy would do. Okay, we take care of you to anybody else. Everybody, hands up. Hands close enough. Well, you didn't raise your hand.
You get accused me of being the spy. The only one who accuses me of being the spy is me.
Close enough. You're arrested too. But look for the other. Somebody else who could be the spy. Now, if we can't really, because it could be anybody, they start, okay, who's not like us? Who's not like us? Who is not one of us? Yes.
Isn't that still really hard to do because like the United States is such a melting pot?
Oh, sure.
You can't really go like who is like us when everyone.
So you could do it by color of skin, religious group. You're exactly right. Or, you know, what about all those German immigrants? No, but the steps to this. At least in World War I and World War II. Now, some people talk about what happened to American Indians, but that was it's pre-industrial. A lot of it. But look for that potential enemy within. And then we get that's about moral. Look for that potential enemy in it. That's actually a really good point. But what happened in World War II? The United States is going to put people for nothing other than the way they look and where they came from. Australians. Who? Who the United States people? Japanese Americans, American citizens. Which makes it even more terrifying, doesn't it? So find that enemy in, and where would this happen? Okay, it says Turkey, but it's the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, we could argue, would be the first genocide. Who were they? Christian Armenians. So there are Armenians that live, they live today, there's actually a country called Armenia. But back then it was part of the Russian Empire. There are Armenians who live all in this area, along with Kurds who are Sunni Muslims, with what we call today Turks or Sunni Muslims, with Arabs who are Sunni Muslims, with also Shiite Arabs in this area right here. Yes. Oh, you're right. It should be Anne. I think that's bad grammar. Thank you for noticing. I wonder if I put down a national and then I went back. Oh, yeah, I did that. But thank you for noticing. Yeah, I should change that. That's one of those stupid mistakes I made.
Your age on everything else about this there for long.
Yes.
Or genocide doesn't exist and nothing bad.
Good luck with that. So the Armenian genocide, what happened was this. In 1915, when the Ottoman Empire attacked here, the Russians not only pushed them back, but they invaded the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire freaked out. And immediately said, how could our armies lose? How could we lose? There must be an enemy within, a group we can't trust. And who is not like us? Christian Armenians. And so they begin to round them up. And these are areas where they would concentrate them. And along the way, some were put in concentration camps. If they made it to concentration camps, they probably survived. even though a significant number would be starved, much like what happened to Jews in Nazi Germany. If they made it to the camps, they probably lived. It was elsewhere they were killed. I'm not saying they wouldn't go through hell, but along the way, thousands would be starved or mowed down with machine guns here. Here is forced starvation. They would take them to railheads along what is now Iraq in the desert and march them out by the hundreds of thousands to die in the desert. So use all the powers of a modern state to round people up and then murder them. Here is this is trying to be sympathetic to the Armenians who survived after the war. They thought there might be an Armenian country, didn't happen. And to publicize it, they're posed with the skulls of dead Armenians. So it's very surreal and creepy and awful. People knew. These are New York Times headlines during the war. We don't know how many Armenians were killed. We don't know. Today, Turkey says it wasn't very many. It's been exaggerated. It wasn't genocide. But we know it's genocide. In fact, one of the biggest, one country that was very much appalled by this was Germany, or was the Ottomans' most important ally, Germany. They were appalled by what they did. But when they did the Ottoman Empire and turned the other way, it's probably over 1 million people, probably less than 2. You get numbers like that, it's hard to even wrap your mind around. And people talked about it, it was horrific, and then, well, what happens? Some of you knew about it, right? I know some of you didn't. And I'm not blaming you if you didn't, but I bet most of you probably didn't know. Or maybe fake about the Armenian genocide. Why don't I?
No, like in general, because everyone teaches about the Jews and everybody teaches.
I don't. Part of this Cold War, because Turkey became an ally in the Cold War, and Turkey denied it happened. I know people, Turkish immigrants in the United States, who said they didn't know. Yeah. And I also know Armenians who. Okay. Yeah. I know a lot of them. It's one of those weird little quirks. But in 1938, so Germany's plan for Jews, and there are almost no Jews in Germany. Part of the reason why they were such a scapegoat, they weren't very many of them. Their plan was to make them leave, to kick them out. And in 1938, the last gas to kick them out. And so they have more repression against them, took away more rights, that just forced them to leave. The world was so racist, nobody would let them in, including the United States wouldn't let them in. People in the US wouldn't let in, they go to Poland. So you probably know what's going to happen. It's going to be shot. Gas. But they said, this looks bad for Germany, and we'll get enemies all around the world. You know, and this is hit some of Hitler's most important advisors who were all for the repression. They just thought it was too obvious. And Hitler's response in 1938 was, today, who remembers the Armenians? That's 1938. No, Hitler was not planning mass murder. The plan was, if they took this land here, where the biggest population of Jews were, they were going to force them as slave laborers or at gunpoint, make them move to go to the rump state of the Soviet Union. But when the war started going so badly, really quick, they changed it. That's 41, 42. Why? Potential enemy within. So with that, here is a horrific picture of an Ottoman official taunting starving Ottoman children before they're sent on the death march. And the point is this, they use the powers of the state, people knew. Now, no, the United States did not do this, but you see the stepping stones for it. Isolating people, targeting somebody for nothing they ever did, but for the color of skin or the religion they were, or what ethnic group they might have been part of. And so let's get back to the United States. So we're leaving total war, but the United States will adopt it. While all this is going on, that will forever change the world, forever change the United States, we're not even part of it for 3 years. That's one of the more amazing things about World War I. It literally changed everything, including the United States, and we would not enter till the end. But that's what we have to talk about. The US remained neutral, and we said we're not going to, we will trade, but we're not going to enter the war. We will not pick sides. And this kind of mocking this because boy, we're making a lot of money sending, not so much munitions, but the nitrogen and things to make the munitions. And here it's there is dogs, and here's the American Bull Terrier. We're not afraid of these other dogs, even though we're neutral. But the United States by 1915, virtually all their trade will be to the Allies. Why? Not the Lusitania, though. Good guess, shout out.
Okay,
No, good guess though. The blockade. We couldn't get past the blockade. Couldn't get past it. Oh, you were mad about Lusitania. Allied winning, that'd be a problem down the road. But it just couldn't get to them. So we traded with the Allies. To the German point of view, then, by 1916, we're basically allied. We're only trading with Britain and France. Well, one thing's going on while this is happening. There's a revolution in Mexico, a massive civil war. We're not going to go through all the details of the Civil War. Dictator was going to be overthrown. It raged all over Mexico. The Yucatan broke away for a while. But the U.S. is going to intervene a number of different times. Kind of big stick diplomacy. Remember that? 1914, there was an incident at Veracruz, the harbor city just east of Mexico City, down the mountains. And the United States would actually shell it and send Marines and Navy men. Over 100 Mexicans and U.S. Marines and sailors were killed. And in 1916, 1917, the U.S. would actually send a regiment and then 2 regiments of cavalry to go chase after a Mexican revolutionary by the name of Pancho Villa. To fund the revolution that was actually going bad for the time, he robbed a bank in the United States. And so the U.S. stumbled after him. It was a disaster. Pancho Villa easily escaped. It didn't fail at all. But when the United States entered the war, we had cavalry in Mexico. And Mexico was kind of mad about this. So with that, we have this Mexican revolution going on. Eventually, a government would be formed called the Carranza government, and Mexico would form kind of a one-state government for about 70 years. There's an election going on too. And this whole Mexico thing, they try to tamp down. Woodrow Wilson ran for re-election. Charles Evan Hughes, Henry Cavill ran at a different time. Charles Evan Hughes, right here of Massachusetts, would be the Republican. But the Republicans were bitterly divided. The most popular Republican, Teddy Roosevelt, was desperately trying to get the United States in the war. And so Woodrow Wilson could run on this great slogan. There's prosperity because of trade, and we're staying out of this horrible war. I'm not sending your boys to die in the trench. He will win. Wilson will win the election. The first Democrat to win consecutive terms since, Andrew Jackson. Who'd you say?
I just said Jackson at the same time. I just had
Had to go through all the presidents. Yeah. Yeah. Because remember, Cleveland won 2 terms, but not consecutive. He's going to be inaugurated in March, and the United States would declare war a month later. What happened? Germany. In 1917, Germany decided to bring back unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany, and this the best way to describe it, they rolled the die. They rolled the die to try to knock Britain out. So remember, just to review, the Lusitania, they tried it, they pulled back. 1916, they did a little bit, pulled back. So the submarines would would surface and stop ships. But in 1917, the plan was different. What they decided was their new commanders, the Kaiser appointed the heroes of the East. Oh, Germany backed down, I've already said that. Paul von Hindenburg, field marshal, the 5-star general, and Ludendorff, his chief of staff. Remember the guy who did Total War? They took command. And if they took command of the army, they took command of Germany in essence. They decided to starve Britain. If we ring them with U-boats and start sinking without warning, the shock will be so horrible that Britain will have to pull out. Britain, they kept thinking they could knock Britain out. They always thought the British commitment was weak. So, here's a propaganda poster of the summer of 1917. Now, the submarines were a little bit better, and what they did is they unleashed the U-boats, one wave, literally, every U-boat, they pulled back to refit and lit them all literally in just one day in February and unleashed them. And the plan was to sink any ship in this area here, that shaded. Now, they didn't have the range really to get here. Submarines are really tiny. But they put a bunch here and a bunch here. And the United States was furious. They broke off diplomatic relations with Germany in protest. So, and Germany knew this, but they figured the United States won't enter the war yet. And then US boats began to be sunk. Now, these are merchant vessels, but US-owned vessels started to be sunk off the coast of Britain. Here is the latest submarine victim, maybe the last. Here's the sub, the Periscope, and US patients. And there's a propaganda poster. But last thing we got to get down. Last thing is going to be the Zimmerman. So the Zimmerman note, Zimmerman was the new German foreign minister. And he sent a telegram to Mexico, to the German ambassador in Mexico, Mexico City. Remember, they're in the middle of a civil war. So it went to the underwater transatlantic telegraph line to New York and then to Mexico City. So it's a Western Union telegraph. This is the telegram right here. That's it. So it basically said, if the United States enters the war because of submarines, Mexico should attack the US. You know, the arrow just kind of floating there. Remember how it did that? Mexico attacks the US. Now they knew, Mexico couldn't really do much to the US, but it would distract them. I should add, this is insane. Mexico was in a civil war. And can you think of anything that would anger the United States more? We've intervened twice because we think Mexico is in our influence. Remember the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine? And then Mexico would get the Mexican cession in return. Remember the Mexican cession? That's what they got after the United States got after the Mexican War. And that's New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, this whole area. And this map shows Texas, but that wasn't part of the cession. Now, this is insane. And Mexico, are you crazy? We're in a civil war. But here's the thing. This passed. American ships started getting sunk. And the Germans didn't know. You see these numbers here? That's the German code. The German code they thought was unbreakable. They knew the British had tapped into the transatlantic telegraph line, but they thought they can't break our code. Guess what? The British had broken the code. And they sat on this message and they waited until a few American ships were sunk. So now the United States is mad. And then Britain turned around and said, look at Germany. Look at these evil Germans. I thought this cartoon's kind of funny. They're sinking your ships, and now they're trying to get Mexico to the third war. Can you think of anything that would make the people in the United States more angry? You can think of a few, but not that many. I know we can all come up with, well, what about alien attack? Yes. Well, let me finish this really quick. So, with that, and this would force Wilson to start committing U.S. ships, being more angry, and eventually, these are the two biggest reasons for war. Everyone got that? I think your hand up, Logan. Is that? Like I said, we can all come up with something. But submarines, Zimmerman note. I should have Mexico looked at this like they're insane. It was so dumb for the Germans. They didn't realize that the British had broken their code. And this would be decisive in naval battles. And guess what's going to happen in the next war? Guess who will break the German code again? Yes, the British would do it again and would help dramatically helped the Allies, and the Germans never realized. The Americans broke the Japanese code.
I'm not sure.
Not completely, but. No, the answer is no.
If our trade with, like Germany, Wilson powers hadn't been stopped, and have lost the contingency.
If there would have been the blockade, yeah.
Like,
Part of Germany, there was a lot of German immigrants and a lot of Irish immigrants who hated, German immigrants who wanted Germany, and a lot of Irish immigrants who hated Britain. Maybe, but at least when it stayed out of the war. Yeah, the block, so you could argue that the blockade, the Allied blockade.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, I'll see you tomorrow. Where were you at again? You told me and I forgot.
I thought it was this week. My mom's birthday, we went to Orlando to go and have a dinner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you run?
I did,
How'd you do?
but I got 2 hours, but I didn't train at all because I thought my time was wrong.
See them.
So I didn't train at all. So it was a pretty tough 2 days after. but-
Yeah, that's a long run. We made it to Thursday. Barely, it's in Bear Week. We got Maddie coming in, and that's the last thing the